Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of SEOs Getting Coffee. Today we have a very special guest. Well, everybody's a special guest, but we have a very, very special guest. We have Adam from No Pork Pies. And Adam, please say hello. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Adam. I work as a digital consultant for No Pork Pies. I also work as a CTO of Mozillion, which is a mobile phone marketplace. So tend to specialize in startup scale ups, kind of working with those sort of companies in SEO and digital marketing.
By the way, Adam, I've always been a massive fan of the fact that your agency is called No Pork Pies. Just
Yeah,
it's
that
just absolutely a brilliant
Can we
name.
can we start off actually by asking where that name came from, Adam?
yeah, it's something that no one or very few people have ever actually like clocked, but the original concept was just basically setting up a blog. And we're going back a few years, probably about 2006, 7, when sort of social media started to kind of really get on the radar of marketing. So it was the concept of setting up a blog, talking about honest marketing, talking about the concept of the shift from, if you like, old school advertising, where it was very much a kind of influential kind of putting this filter on everything, to this kind of open and honest marketing where you couldn't get away with lying. And the No Pork Pies name came off the back of Cockney slang, pork pies, porky pies, meaning lies.
Mm.
So it's no lies, is where it kind of comes from, but very few people get that. And then I set it up as a blog originally and just kind of used it as marketing information. And then when I set up my own business, then stuck with the domain and used it as the agency name, and that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, I
Brilliant.
mean, I when I saw it, that's what I thought that it was, no lies type of thing. So I absolutely love the name. But today we're not talking about agencies or anything like that. We're talking about e-commerce. Specifically, we're talking about the difference between kind of off-the-shelf e-commerce platforms and custom platforms. Now, it's going to be a very interesting one because I have a sneaky suspicion that me and you differ on which way is the best way to go. So, yeah, come on, tell us first, like, where do you like stand on the divide? Do you think that people should custom build or should they just do off the shelf?
I'm actually on the fence on both, to be honest. I'm not gonna say that custom build is the way to go, because I don't believe it is. I've in terms of WordPress, in terms of the kind of platforms, the frameworks that are already built, Shopify, etc., they're brilliant for specific projects. I think it ultimately depends on the scale and scope of what you want to do. In terms of web build projects I've done in the past, I've generally tend to go to WordPress, and the logic behind that is for probably most people, 80% of businesses, you could get away with a WordPress site. Um, but more to the point, it's just my consideration of UX, and I don't mean that necessarily from the front end of the website. I mean more from the point of view of if someone needs to manage their own website, WordPress is probably one of the best ones in terms of UX, giving you scope, giving you scale, having, and I know a lot of people hate them, but having the visual builders that kind of allow you to kind of create a site that can look really good with no coding. And WordPress is brilliant for that sort of thing. So I think, most people to build a site of some form, WordPress certainly ticks the box. So I'm not going to be anti, framework WordPress, Shopify, because they do work very well. But there's other elements where, Mozillion is a custom build, and I would say that it's certainly one of the biggest projects I've ever worked on, in terms of working from scratch and going through the whole process. And, I've worked in SEO for 15, 16, I don't know, something like that, years now. Prior to that, I worked in tech and marketing in general. And what I love, and I wouldn't do this, in an earlier stage of my career, I certainly wouldn't have gone down the custom route. But now, because I know how to put a website together, because I know how the UX should work, because I know how SEO should integrate into the code and how it needs to work, having that knowledge and understanding of how it all kind of works together means that I can create a website from scratch, to an extent with framework back-end elements to it, which will be very strong for SEO. And I've just found that off of the back of this project, the SEO results have been really, really, really strong, to the extent that I wouldn't have expected them to be that strong if I did it in a WordPress or Shopify type site. But that's not to say that it hasn't had a lot of other issues that you would just get out the box with WordPress and it would be a 5-minute job, whereas it's taken a month to build in certain other elements of the site. So, I'd say I sit on the fence on both, to be honest with you. But it's I'm not going to be one way or the other, because I've built WordPress sites, and I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't build a custom site for someone that doesn't know what they want or how to do it, because it would just be a nightmare when I hand the site over to them for them to kind of come back and go, oh, I'm trying to manage this, can't do it. It's like, well, you might as well just build a static website, because like if they can't use the content management system, then there's no point in having it, So that's where WordPress really kind of comes into its own, is the fact that the content management side of it is just exceptionally good.
Yeah, but this is it. And one of the things that you kind of mentioned there, and, I was hoping that it's going to be a heated discussion where I'm like, off the shelf, and you're like, no, it's custom is better, but we're not going to get that here,
No,
I
we're not.
guess. But like you, one of the things I do like custom builds. I really do. And I think with a custom build, if you know what you want, you can the opportunities for innovation are endless. But one of the problems, and this happens obviously, that's the biggest problem with like custom solutions, is the integration side of things. So we're not talking just about SEO, we're talking about the full tech stack, particularly when you're looking at like e-commerce that is complex. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, if you have a custom solution, the integration side of the story? Because presumably you're constantly having to tweak and stuff, because as your tech stack grows, so does your custom solution need to follow.
Yes, I mean, I'd say it's one of the biggest problems, but also it's not a case that you can't integrate. I mean, a lot of it is more beneficial being a custom build because of the customization, if you like, of the integration. So, I mean, I suppose, okay, so if I'm looking, at the process of what's happened with Mozillion. So Mozillion, just to give you a bit of background, Mozillion is about 3 years old, and it was literally from scratch. So the concept was, and how it kind of came about, was off the back of No Pork Pies. Len, who's the boss, if you like, at Mozillion, came with the idea. Non-technical, just the idea. And it was basically a case of scoping out the entire project, building it, wireframing it, going through the whole thing, which is why it's fun. And then kind of building it as a custom build, just because it's a marketplace as opposed to an e-commerce. So it's like, to go with a kind of off-the-shelf e-commerce platform wouldn't have been right, just because there's a lot of processes in the back end that we wanted to kind of, have that are customized. And to be able to customize it on something like WordPress or whatever, it would have just been like, well, actually, we're kind of hacking everything in order to get this work. We might as well just build it as a custom build. And that's kind of how we did it. And it's built in Laravel, which is a PHP framework, and that's how it's done.
It's a good one, yeah.
It's a good one. It means that you get a lot of integrations with Laravel that are pre-built. So it's not like hand code everything. It's kind of like, okay, well, there are a lot of things that plug into Laravel. It's quite a big community. If you want payment gateways, there's already payment gateways that integrate with Laravel, so you don't need to kind of start from scratch. You can just import the things into there. So it saves a lot of time. So there is that element. It is a lot more obviously code intense, because you've got to know how to integrate that process and how to kind of get it to work with Laravel. But it's not start from scratch, go through every API, start reading, I've got to build this. And, there is elements of like, okay, that's already been built. I'll just take that and import it. So that does help a lot. So in terms of that kind of process, that makes a big difference. But yeah, it is the biggest problem. I mean, probably payment gateways, and this probably isn't exclusive to the concept of bespoke frameworks, but payment gateways has been our biggest problem. Not from the integration point of view, just from the point that payment gateways are
A problem.
a problem. Yes, difficult, shall we say? They're not the easiest sort of company to work with. So we've gone through a few. Stripe was our biggest problem.
Yeah, I worked with Stripe before. It's a nightmare. It really
Yeah,
is.
Stripe. I mean, Stripe as a platform, and this is the thing: if you had a WordPress site, turn Stripe on, great, fine. But the problem is, we're selling mobile phones. Mobile phones is heavily fraudulent, which is one of the reasons that Mozillion exists. But I mean, ultimately, that is the concept of mobile phones: heavily fraudulent. Stolen phones, phones that are still on contract, which technically means you don't own them, so you can't sell them. Phones that are blocked, all these sort of things. Phones that are bricks, quite literally. And phones that are, literally hacked, just there's massive amount of fraud in it. And also chargebacks, because it's quite a high value item. So people that buy something, go to the bank, say that wasn't me, and then try and get their money back. That happens a lot. So obviously from that point of view, the financial platforms are a bit dubious within these sort of things, because obviously it may come back and hurt them. But because we knew that on day one, we spoke to Stripe, said, look, this is what we're building. Are you happy with that? And it's like, yeah. So the whole platform was built to integrate Stripe. And
Nice.
bespoke site built the whole thing with Stripe integrated. So it worked really well, really seamless. The process of, because it's buyers and sellers, we wanted to make sure that a seller can get paid when we approve the phone, and then the buyer, obviously, the money comes across, etc., etc. So it was all integrated really well into a nice flow, a nice UX, because that was part of the checkout process. Was to, the benefit of having bespoke is the fact that we don't need to go with a standard WordPress or WooCommerce checkout. We can customize our entire checkout journey to make it simple, minimize the amount of headaches and problems with the process, and clean it all up. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud of with Mozillion, is the checkout process is quite slick. But yeah, probably about a month, maybe 2 months in, Stripe kind of didn't come back, tell a lie, they didn't tell us at all. They sent us an email that basically said, we're kicking you off the platform, and we're going to take you off in 7 days.
My
Right.
God.
So that was fun. So basically the whole website's being bespoke built around Stripe, and then it's launched and it's start running, and then we've got 7 days to go. Right, we can't use Stripe anymore. So basically quite a big hack of like, all right, we'll stick PayPal on there. I can do that quite quickly. We'll have to manually pay the sellers, and we'll have to sort all this out and, do this. So managed to get PayPal integrated within the week. During that week, obviously tried to talk to Stripe to find out why. Wouldn't talk to us. Live chat won't work anymore because they don't talk to you. Completely just cut you off. And then you ask them what's going on. It's like, oh, well, I can't tell you. So not even willing to talk about it. And 7 days. Now, I looked this up on forums afterwards and found that other people had the same issue. But in some cases, they just got cut off. They didn't even get 7 days. So I suppose from that point of view, I should be thankful. But on top of that, they then keep your money for 90 days as well. So ultimately, we had several £1,000s worth of phone money in this account, and then they wouldn't give it to us for 90 days either. Now, luckily, we were okay, but keeping in mind we're a brand new startup at this point, and they held on to about 30-40 grand for 90 days. So they could have killed us quite easily, quite quickly. But luckily we got through it. Got PayPal in there, then moved on to Adyen, which was actually a very good platform, focused on marketplace, good platform to work with, but just probably, I would say, just a bit too big and busy for what we wanted it for. I mean, eBay use Adyen, a lot of the marketplaces use Adyen, so it is a good platform, but we're still, we're quite a small business. There was too much in it. It's like, we would have needed a full-time accountant working with it, because the reports weren't great. So to kind of work with the platform and to reconcile everything, it was just a nightmare. So we ended up moving away from that quite recently and moved back to PayPal. And actually, I've just found PayPal probably easiest one to kind of work with. I know that they sometimes can be a bit of a pain, but generally they are quite responsive. If there's a problem, they kind of fix it quite quickly. But the integration is just quite, very easy to integrate PayPal into a site. And because of that, it's like that kind of process of using PayPal is just like, actually, we'll go with this. They do have a marketplace solution as well. So you can do sellers and payouts and stuff like that with it. So it's just probably one of the most flexible ones. So we ended up going with that, and there's pros and cons to that. But as I say, the payment gateways have been the hardest thing to kind of manage because they're the ones we have to keep chopping and changing all the time. And ideally, you want to stick with a platform, but starting a new build, go through a process, you don't know what you're going to be using, especially with a brand new site. There's a lot of stuff that we built that no longer used, didn't work, so we bin that, put something else in, work with that. And having that level of flexibility is quite important. I mean, there's obviously, if you work with WordPress or something, you just go, okay, well, I want to plug in this now, and then you get a plugin, you turn it on, and great, it works, and that saves a lot of time. And then you could probably do a quicker minimum viable product type element with a WordPress type site. Because if you've got to integrate an API, it could potentially take a month because, a lot of the times the API documentation isn't great. You bounce it back and forth, you're playing with stuff, it doesn't work, and then you look at it and then you talk to support and it's like, oh, that's because the API is wrong. And it's like, great, thanks for that.
That's the thing, that's the complexity. So with custom builds, there's this whole like complexity that is, not just the integrations that might come as a needs further down the line, but even, and this comes out from your story. So what I got from it is kind of two, it's the dialectic of it. You need to plan ahead and know what you want, and you need to be flexible enough to like pivot because it's a custom build, and things, things can, no matter how much you plan, things can go wrong, like with the Stripe example that you had.
And this is, I think that's the thing. I personally think that a large corporate type business could never do what Mozillion is doing, and the reason behind that is because things have to change so quickly. It's like, because like we'll put a tool in, it's like, that's not right, or that's not working, we've got to change something else. That kind of flexibility works really well with a startup scale up type business. It wouldn't be viable for the corporates that I've worked with, where things can take months to actually get signed off and then go through legal, and they suddenly fall apart and nothing happens. And then because the concept is you launch something, you're not really sure whether it's going to work or not, you're not really sure how well the API is going to integrate. You kind of put it in there, and then you play with it and monitor it. And having tools to monitor is really important. That's probably one of the things that I've got set up quite heavily on the site, is just like bug monitoring platforms and analytics platforms, and looking at different insights into what's happening on the platform, so that if there is a bug, if there is a problem, we pick it up early, pick it up quickly, and can fix it quite quickly. And that kind of agile process works really well for a scale up or startup, but it wouldn't work for a corporate, because I've worked with corporates in the past, and it would take 9 months just to change page titles or something basic on the site, and it's like, well, that just won't work. It's impossible to have a bespoke process with that. Everything's got to be planned ahead.
But in terms of, I guess, but that's the thing, if you're working with off the shelf, is that yes, obviously, if you can get approval, but then at least, you've got people that can actually make those changes, where I think, with a custom build, perhaps you are a bit more limited in the sense that, okay, you're going to wait for somebody to make those changes for you. Whereas like obviously with WordPress, Shopify, or what, whatever, you can obviously just have anybody that's able to obviously get trained on how to change a title tag or whatnot, right? So I guess that kind of moves on really to the question of like, how on the SEO side, how can, out of the box with WordPress, with certain plugins, with Shopify, with an app, certain apps that you can get, you can kind of come out of you can come out and launch something and have like pretty decent shape SEO, right? If you know what you're doing, or if you're working with a freelancer or whatnot. But of course, as you grow and as you get you've got to obviously develop that strategy. But what's the difference in your opinion? Like you were saying, obviously, about like the custom build gives you the ability to be able to kind of, basically have better SEO, right? So what kind of, explain that a little bit, like what does the custom build enable you to do that potentially like WordPress or Shopify doesn't enable you to do?
So I suppose there's two elements that I would say have really benefited the site to the extent that I am leaning more towards a bespoke build than a WordPress type site. It's not to say that the WordPress sites aren't good for SEO. There's plenty of WordPress sites that I've worked on and the SEO is perfectly fine and they work really well. But when you're in a massively competitive market, and we're talking like a competitive market that's got high budgets, high spend, mobile phones, our competitors are technically Amazon, Apple, Currys, Back Market. We're talking like some of the biggest spenders in terms of digital marketing, certainly in the country, if not, globally. So it's a big market, but it's also a rewarding market from search, because you're talking like, an iPhone 13 search volumes are tens of thousands a month just for that model. And then you've got all the other models. So, huge search volumes as a potential benefit for SEO. Now, in terms of how it's benefited, what I would say is there's a number of things that obviously you'll read on blogs in terms of SEO that you'll go through and say, this is important, this is important, this is important. And I guess it's kind of, I don't know, I'm going back to school here, which is a weird scenario. But I mean, I remember at like school, like I can't remember, maybe English or something, some English lesson. And it's like, they're teaching you the basics of like how to formulate a poem or something like that. And I remember the teacher saying something along the lines of, you got to learn how to do it first and then you can break the rules. That kind of concept of like, you can't just break the rules straight away. You got to learn what the rules are and then you can break them. And I think that's quite relevant to where Mozillion is at, because there's so many things that if I did a technical audit or an SEO audit that I would do for a client on Mozillion, I would find loads of things that I would go, that's wrong. The site's relatively slow. It's got elements that I would say Cool Web Vitals, no way it would pass that, nowhere near it. There's things in it that certainly I would want to improve from a technical point of view, but ultimately there's other things that it's stronger at. And I think, looking at those kind of elements, it's kind of like, well, okay, the dynamic optimization, page titles and meta descriptions, all those sort of things have been done. And to be fair, it's not really any different to what you would do in WordPress. We've still got an admin area. We've still got an area where you log in. And in order for me to write page titles, that's all in the admin area. I go in there, I create page titles, same as I would in WordPress. So you're not really losing anything in that sort of sense. But what it is giving me is extremely clean code. There's none of this crap that obviously everyone talks about with WordPress when you start putting all your plugins in and putting all your visual builder and everything in there, and all of a sudden you look at the HTML and the code and it's like 35 miles long and most of it is just completely irrelevant. That is certainly one thing I would say is useful, is the control over the code and the control over if you're looking at the concept of the way that Google will index it, and you're looking at the fact that there's so much header and body code at the top of a template in a WordPress site, where Google's got to go through all of that crap before it even gets to what is classed as the SEO copy or the useful elements at the bottom of the page. That's taken up most of the Google cache, if you like, whereas a clean site doesn't have any of that. It's all very clean, very structured, and that gives me control over how it's structured, putting schema in the page, putting all these kind of value added, if you like, elements into the code that I have control over, and the template itself. That, I say, is a big benefit. And the other benefit is just the element of UX. Now, that's not to say that you can't have a nice clean front end in WordPress. I know with more with an e-commerce site, it's a bit less flexible on a e-commerce site like Shopify, where you'll have things that start going into these categories, and then you've got to start like going, oh well, I don't want it in a collection, I've got to get rid of the collections, and you've got to start moving around and start messing all this stuff that just doesn't need to exist. And it's crap like that you need to kind of get around. And obviously there's a lot of people that don't know that, and therefore it just sits in the collection. It's like, well, there's better ways to do SEO. And I think, I wireframed Mozillion from day one, going through the process of like, I'm doing this based on the fact I did keyword research first. I looked at how people are searching for things, what sort of process are looking at the competitors, doing a lot of research around that to wireframe the entire structure of the site. And that structure was built around SEO from day one in a wireframe. So the way that all the products kind of sat, and it's quite different to some of the competitors, that massively helped me. And because it's a bespoke site, I didn't need to go, oh, it's going to go in a collection and then I've got to start hacking this and moving this around. It's like literally the whole site was like, that's going to go there. That will then flow into that. That's how the flow is going to work. That will then have this. And obviously that's tweaked over time as we've tested and played with different things. But that is, the structure of it. And then there's the copy on the site, that it's deliberately detailed, and that's nothing SEO wise, it is obviously because it's in there to kind of help with SEO, but it's more of a case of just looking at the competitors' sites. And a lot of them don't really go with massive amount of detail, if you like. We deliberately kind of went into a structure of, when we're talking about a phone, we have a set structure of like, let's talk about the design, let's talk about the camera, let's talk about the processor, and put a bit of detail into every single phone about that, so that actually on the page, it's obviously got the product page, it's got the products available, it's got a bit of an intro blurb about what the phone is, and it's got the tech spec, which is what most of the competitors will have. But then we've also got quite a big detailed section of more information, or we might have reviews on the site that we then link across to. And just to add, the resources section of the site is all built on WordPress. So it's not the case that that's all bespoke. It's like, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. The content is all WordPress, but the actual product and main section of the site is all custom. And then if we've got a review, we'll link across to that, or comparisons as well do very well for us. iPhone 15 versus 14 or whatever it may be. Those sort of things work really well. So it's focusing on the content. Now that's nothing to say you can't do any of that on WordPress, but the concept of just having the complete flexibility to wireframe a site and control the UX is really important, and the code in the back end to make sure it's really clean, really simple to index, that I think has made a massive difference as well. And those are the main things that the customization has given us. And to talk about, the results elements of that, it's taken a while, but 3 years I don't think is that big a deal considering the market we're in. But, the site ranks for ridiculous terms that I didn't expect it to rank. We rank second or third for iPhones. By an iPhone, I think we're second, maybe third behind Curry's. And, we're only second because Apple's number one. So it's like, Apple's number one, then it's generally Curry's or us, which is insane because we don't have an SEO team. There isn't an in-house SEO team. We don't outsource. We don't have an agency. I'm very much managing that whilst also managing the whole tech stack of the business. So that is just a pure case that it's SEO into the business, with the tech stack, with the marketing element.
I guess that's a bit, you've kind of done the SEO first. I think that's what I mean. It's like an SEO first strategy, or an SEO first kind of design and build thing, which I think is like quite an exciting thing to hear and to pick up on. Because if only more people approach projects like that, the amount of times I think where you speak to, and I guess this is like a really good kind of tip, really, is that if you're starting out a new business or whatnot, is that making sure that you do your market research, but not forgetting on the SEO and kind of like search volumes. I'm sure most people can get an idea of like, well, is this product actually got a demand? It's like, or has this thing got a demand, and kind of working that way before you even spend any money on your business, is to kind of think, well, actually, what is the competition like? And you've gone into like a heavyweight category there, so you're fighting against some big heavyweights, aren't you? So, but SEO first, that sounds, that's I like that.
And it's really interesting and explain. So one of the things that I've been playing around in my mind was around, so you were saying the size of the company and the stage of their growth kind of makes a difference. Like the big companies, off the shelf is better because of the whole like complexity of decision making and all of that, whereas startup it's better custom. But then on the SEO side of things, you have this flip side where, your competition doesn't need to do like all of this stuff with clean code and with with optimizing their product pages and collection pages, um, because they have already that all of the other elements that Google is looking for to rank. They have like the brand element, the brand recognition, all of the kind of signals that it looks for. So you found a competitive edge at the start in the actual tech stack and a customized solution. But then at one point when you grow enough, you then it becomes easier to actually at that point switch to maybe an off the shelf, because you're so big that you can't really, you can't do custom anymore because of the whole like decision making structure and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, I'd kind of say that, I mean, when you get to the point where you're bigger, because I mean, this is what we're looking at the moment. We're looking at version 2, if you like, of the site now. Because obviously version 1, there's a lot of stuff in there, there's a lot of crap. And, the reason it's slow is because obviously there's stuff that was built that's no longer used. And it's messy. It's that kind of element of like, okay, well, version 2 is like, okay, we know what we want, we know what we are. Now let's build it around that. Which means that I suppose if you're kind of moving into that idea of like, you're now becoming a grown up, so to speak, then what you'll find is your operational processes are a lot more ingrained. They're a lot more defined. Whereas a startup, they're not really defined. You're making it up as you go along, and because you have that kind of operational process in place and things have to work this way, it makes it a lot easier even to build a bespoke site, because you don't need to change as much as we are changing. We're changing stuff all the time because we're trying different models, we're trying different processes. But when you get to that kind of, right, we're now big, we're now kind of global with, our scale now is to move into other international markets. It's not the platform, it's the growth, and because of that, a bespoke site is potentially still beneficial, because what you can potentially do is go, okay, well, now I'm going to build the APIs and I'm going to make sure it all works in the back end and works the way that operationally it needs to work. But then we never change it again, or we only need to do very small tweaks on it, in which case it doesn't matter if it takes 6-9 months to do it. It does, because you kind of lose your competitive advantage, but it doesn't from a business point of view, because actually you're only making small tweaks. If I'm looking at the changes I'm currently making to the site, it's more based on the concept of adding additional product lines, which is why we're looking at version 2. It just gives us more scale for adding stuff. We're looking at the moment of adding sims. We're just going through that process of potentially having, or we've got sims on there at the moment, so call it contracts, because basically the search volume around phone contracts is huge. So that's another example of SEO research. Originally we had it on there as phone plus sim, because it's not what is a traditional contract. It's basically a case that you're buying a SIM plan and you're buying a phone and then you're bundling it together. But the search volume around phone contracts is something like 15,000 a month. The search volume around SIM plan is something like 500. So there's, again, search comes into that decision making process. But we're at a point where, as we get into version 2, the site itself, the framework, if you like, the way I look at it is, what we're building in the back end is we're building our own WordPress, we're building our own CMS, and that CMS, now that we know more about how the site is structured, how the business is structured, that CMS will become a lot more settled. It won't need new APIs all the time, because we're going to go, okay, well, we're going to use PayPal, we're going to be using this inventory management process, we're going to be using these delivery companies. This is the process of how we do this with the phones. This is the process of how we sell stuff. All of that becomes settled. So what we end up building is our own bespoke WordPress CMS. And then the front end is the front end. It's the same as a theme in WordPress. If I had a WordPress site, I still need to build my own theme. So that doesn't make any difference. If we want to then build the theme in 2-3 years' time, we could just update it with a solid back end. So it's the back end part that is the heavy lifting, because it's kind of like you're having to build your own WordPress. But as the business evolves, you get to a point where actually this is now built around the business operations. That means the business is more flexible, more scalable, because we've now got this automated process that this happens, someone gets paid. We don't need to manually go to the bank and go, okay, here's your balance sheet. All those sort of things take time. They're time consuming. We can automate that entire process. around how we want to do it. And once we've done that once, then the framework is completely bespoke, and it means that scale is a lot easier. And profit is a lot easier because you don't need as big a team, for instance, if everything's automated. So there's elements of bespoke, but as I say, I think like I said, the concept of the resources section being in WordPress, that's to me a no-brainer, because it's like, well, that's what WordPress is good at. I mean, to build our own concept management system for a resources section will be massively consuming time-wise and not really necessary.
That's the thing. You have this quite a perfect marriage between like bespoke and off the shelf, but that doesn't happen for a lot of companies. What happens is that you have, at least in my experience, you have somebody at the startup stage who really likes custom stuff and builds everything custom, including the content management system. And then when you're at a scale, it becomes like this absolute monster of not being able to do anything because A, you can't get the approval. B, you can't even with the approval, you can't do it because there's, this somebody sitting in a dark room who built it, the whole thing.
Yeah, there's like two people that know how it works.
Yeah, how it works.
And they're both on holiday.
So your growth is, you're like stunted as an employee and as a company because everything was custom built from the beginning. So, I mean, it sounds like you found like a really good, you've planned it out so that it's a good balance between both solutions, but it's not like, in my experience, it's either or, either they start with something that's going to turn into a problem later on because nothing integrates with anything because it's all custom built, or they start off with off the shelf and then load way too many integrations into it where the site just suffers for SEO and for other channels as well. So
I think one thing to say is Laravel has helped a lot with that, because as I say, as much as you kind of obviously have developers, they build bespoke processes, go through that process. But as I say, using Laravel, you've got a set structure within the code. You've got a set process of where things need to go. So it is a lot easier to kind of hand elements over because there's this structure. And if you know how to develop within Laravel, then you know that these sort of elements are going to be over here, this is going to be over there, and things should be a bit more logical. It's not it's not kind of complete bespoke mess where it's like sometimes this JavaScript stuck in this folder for some unknown reason and you can never find it. It's like, what the hell is that doing? There's clearly going to be elements of that, but ultimately you can, if you're careful with it and you document it and you go through the process, Laravel can be a lot more structured than just completely bespoke. That's one thing. And the other side of it as well is, I've worked on plenty of WordPress sites where the site can't survive without the developer as well. It's no different in some cases because, fair enough, if you're building a simple site, if you're building a really simple site that just does what most sites do, and you just build a really standardized WordPress site, and yes, you do a nice theme on the front of it and that's all customized, but the rest of it is all pretty standard WordPress. That's great, but most sites aren't that, especially if you want to have the competitive advantage. If you're just going like, I'm just downloading WordPress and setting up the standard, then that's not really going to achieve what you need to achieve. You're not going to get the rankings you want just by going, here's a template, here's a theme, thank you very much, there you go, nice quick site. You need to put the time into it regardless. And from that point of view, then you start to customize it. And as soon as you start to customize it, then you have exactly the same issues, because then you get a developer who basically builds their own plugins, sticks it in order to get the functionality you want. Well, as soon as you've got that, then you need that developer, because as soon as the developer stops working on it, suddenly someone else comes along and can't make out how the plugin works, and you're stuck again. And it's like, well, that's not massively different to having a bespoke site.
So, are we now thinking that there is no such thing as off the shelf? Have we gotten to the point where now there is no because I know what you mean, and that does happen a lot, but I've seen like some really big sites where most of the tech stack, I mean, all of it is really off the shelf stuff, and that work really, really well. But you need to kind of not go too crazy. It's not about like having every plugin in the world and plugging it in. It's about kind of ensuring that you go SEO first, really, and you know why you're putting something in and why you shouldn't put something in, really.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is another controversial argument is the whole Apple versus anyone else type concept. And years ago I used to be anti-Apple as well. It's like, oh, I don't need that, whatever. But ultimately now, and for probably 12, 13 years, I've now been massively Apple, just in the sense that I just like the way it all kind of works together
Works
and everything
together, yeah.
together. And it's
Oh,
like
the
they kind of
hammering.
rope you into this kind of concept of like, oh right, okay, well my phone works with my laptop. It's like, this is, and I think if you look at that kind of Apple business model, I mean, Apple control the tech as well as the software, and because of that, the two can mold very nicely together to the point where it just works. I mean, that's generally how I explain Apple to people, is it just works, and I appreciate there's plenty of people out there with Android and everything else, and and obviously it's got a lot better. But my historical, and I haven't been with Android for a while, but my historical experience of Android is just the element of, Google will release an update, but my phone won't do the update because of like the network decides that they don't want to do that update or whatever. So, I'm then not got the latest version of the phone, or I'm sitting in the car and the Bluetooth doesn't work whilst I'm driving along, which drove me insane. And that's ultimately why I got rid of the Android, because it was like the amount of times I'm driving there and answer the phone and suddenly it's coming out my phone and I can't talk to someone. It just works. That was my point with it. And I suppose, if you've got control on a website over everything, the whole code, the whole infrastructure, you can, if you know what you're doing, and this is the point, I think we've got to come back to that. You got to know what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Right?
If you know what you're doing. And the problem is that sometimes only one person knows what they're doing. So when they leave, you're in this situation where it's risky, what I'm saying. Look, I agree with you. I'm on the fence in terms of, I love the combined approach. I love some custom, some off the shelf. But I always lead with, let's see if we can find something off the shelf first that will do what we want it to do.
Yeah, it's also cost as well, though.
So that's the first thing. I always go with off the shelf first, and then if it can't do what I want it to do, or there's problems with it for SEO or whatever it may be, then I say, okay, right, let's look at custom solutions as the kind of the second step, really, rather than the first.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, I think yes, I agree, in the sense that, any business needs to weigh up what priorities they've got and what resources they've got. And, the fact is, as I say, looking at sort of what I did with Mozillion and what I did with a few clients is I go in as a consultant, and I don't do that in the sense of I'm going in to build a website or whatever. I go in as a consultant, and the concept of the consultancy model to me works very well for businesses like that, because you advise them on what is the right way to go. You're not going in as an agency that specializes in SEO or one siloed approach. You're not going in as a freelancer that ultimately just wants to build the site. You're going in to advise on what the business can do from a strategic point of view. And I think that is a good way to go for any small business with a limited budget. And to be fair, it's good for a big business, but in theory, a big business should have the people in-house that are capable of doing that. Not necessarily always the case, but anyway. But, certainly from a small business point of view, going in and giving that level of knowledge and understanding, where you can kind of say, look, okay, a bespoke website is going to be really beneficial to you based on your operational processes. Now, the thing is, Mozillion is a marketplace. There isn't that many great marketplace platforms, and you keep that in mind. And that was one of the reasons why it was a bespoke site in the first place. It's a marketplace. There's buyers, there's sellers, there's a process to that. You can do elements of marketplaces within Shopify, within WordPress, but to be honest with you, it just basically means that the seller sells a phone to you. It's more like a trade-in model, and then you sell it onto the buyer. It's not really how Mozillion works, which is basically the seller lists the phone, the buyer buys the phone, it then comes to Mozillion to check it, make sure it's all right and everything else, and then it goes on to the buyer. Because of that kind of hybrid marketplace model, it needed something, a bit more customizable. So, that was the reason behind it. And this is the benefit of a consultant, is going in and going, what do you want to achieve? How are you going to do this? What's your budgets? How do you want to do, what's the plan, and how can we scale this? And, I had a plan very early on in the model to basically say, okay, well, version 1 is just going to be to get on par with the competitors. I want to build a site that isn't necessarily better than anyone else. It's got good, strong UX. It's got a nice flow. It's just as good, if you like, as what's already out there. Now, a lot of the competitors' sites, Music Magpie and all that stuff, they're messy. They're kind of deliberately messy to an extent, but they're messy and they're busy. And that's one of the things that I wanted to get around, was the idea of just making a strong UX. But it was always a case of SEO sat in the background. Do what we can with SEO. Start small. Start with the long tail, making sure that we rank for, refurbished iPhone 15, black 256, really long. But we got that quite quickly, those sort of terms, because of the structure of the site. And then over time, that's helped to build up into the more generic terms.
Well, but this is exactly what I was saying. You did exactly the same thing. You came in, you already had pre-knowledge around marketplaces and what you can do with them with the off-the-shelf stuff. So you already came with the information where, when you looked at their process, you already knew this is not going to do it. So what's going to do it is the custom.
And I mean, just to add to it, I mean, I'd say as well that it's basically a process of looking at what you want to plan out and do. And it's difficult with a startup, what you want to plan out and do over the next 12, 24 months, because if you look at it and go, okay, well, I'm going to build a WordPress site now, but you then look at the future, 12, 24 months in the future, and go, well, I want to be here in 24 months. Is that website going to achieve that? And if the answer is no, then it's like, well, the outlay is going to be more expensive to build a custom. It's going to be, more time intensive. But if it means that it's going to achieve your objectives in 2 years, then, ultimately that's what you need to look at. And if you don't have the funding to be able to achieve that now, then I suppose, that's where the whole startup thing comes in. Is like, well, what can I do? Because like you've got to kind of think, how am I going to get to that point? Especially from a tech stack point of view. If it's just like, oh, I'm going to the market and I'm selling a few phones in the stalls, then it's like, fine, that doesn't cost you anything. You've got to get a market and you sell some phones and obviously get stock. But if it's kind of a case that your whole business is built around tech, which Mozillion is, it's the platform is ultimately what the business is, then the investment in the bespoke infrastructure is essential to have. You couldn't launch Mozillion in a WordPress site on day one, because ultimately it wouldn't have survived. It wouldn't have got to the point. People wouldn't have liked it. The UX wouldn't have worked quite as well. The back end processes wouldn't have worked quite as well. There wouldn't be anything unique about it. And ultimately that would have meant that in 12 months, it's like, well, we're not getting anywhere. We're not achieving our SEO results. We're not getting any traffic. It's costing us a fortune on paid search to get traffic, and ultimately people aren't converting because the site's not doing it. So, and therefore you might as well just give up on day one and not bother spending 12 months worth of money on a site that's not going to achieve what you need to do. Sure. So, it's having that knowledge at the beginning is quite important. So where you want to be in the next 2 years.
So Adam, how did you celebrate when you outranked the likes of Currys?
I put a post on LinkedIn saying, look. I'm very aware that when you look at a result and like as soon as you start shouting about it, Google suddenly kicks you out. I'm this constant paranoia that as soon as I tell anyone that suddenly it's going to drop out, but it's been there for about 6-9 months now, so I'm kind of quite a bit more confident about telling people, look where we are. Google seems to like it. There's been multiple updates and it's still there. So there's something Google likes about the site that means that it's continuing to kind of get that level of growth.
Good stuff.
But it's that kind of process.
Congratulations on that. Well done. Finally, as we just wrap up, then let's do room 404. Adam, we invite all of our guests to banish something to room 404, so where it will never see the light of day again. So this can be all types of different things that we've had in there. We've had whole operating systems. GA4 has been in there a few times now. I think he pretty much just lives in there permanently.
It's a 410 GA4 by now.
Yeah, well, that's true. So we invite you to pop something into room 404.
That's a good question. I'm just thinking about something a bit different to the standard GA4, which will definitely go there. It's horrible, but I'd probably say I'm gonna go with like some elements of coding using something like Fiverr. So the concept of outsourcing coding on the cheap.
Okay.
Right. So, it's basically, I need a page built, not necessarily a front end thing, maybe something a bit more complex than that. Something that possibly maybe needs to integrate into Laravel or something that needs a blog plate. And then just go in, okay, I'm just going to get it cheap and I'm just going to give someone 100 quid on Fiverr, and get them to build it. That, I think when the results come back, it's generally not worth the aggravation of just trying to save yourself a few quid, because it takes a lot longer and it's crap.
Yeah, just like link building on Fiverr, I guess. Really.
Yes, this is it. Yeah, I mean, doing anything like that on the cheap, where it's kind of like I'm going to do that, but certainly from a code point of view, because ultimately, as we've said throughout this podcast, to go through the process of having clean, nice, tidy code is very beneficial. So then to kind of go, oh well, I'm just going to get someone on Fiverr to chuck something together, and then they come back with a dog's dinner that doesn't really work and has a load of bugs and takes like 2 months to actually like finally get to the point of doing something that you wanted to do, and then it's ultimately so messy that actually you should have just paid someone a few hundred quid in the first place, and you would have actually got something that worked a lot quicker. That's probably something I put in there, because there's a lot of people that obviously like to go cheap and find that it takes a lot longer and doesn't really do what they want, and ends up binning the project because it doesn't get anywhere.
Nice one. Good addition.
Good. It's good. Yep. Thank you very much. Well, Adam, it's been a pleasure. I think there's loads and loads and loads of knowledge that you've shared, and it's been really interesting listening to your story really, and yeah, I think a lot of people are going to take a lot away from this episode. So yeah, thank you very much. We will see you at the next Semantics event, I hope.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes,
good stuff. So Semantics is scheduled for October. So we'll put the actual date in the description. But thanks everybody for listening. Emina, do you have anything else?
Just to say, at the time of filming this, the Semantics is in October. So by the time this goes live, it might not be October.
You never know. But yes, at the time of filming. To cover our backs. Adam, just quickly before we leave, where can people find you on social media?
LinkedIn is probably the only social media I use. I've given up on any other form of social media. So LinkedIn is the only one I'm actively on, which is LinkedIn/Noport Pies, I believe, is my profile still.
Fantastic.
So you can find me on there.
Brilliant.
We'll put
thanks
the link
very much.
in as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, we will. Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody. Please do engage and comment, and just send us any questions for any of us, including Adam. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.